Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and what you see out here on the bench is my worm bag version 4.0. And what my aim today was to get the contents of this bag emptied in such a way that I've actually separated all the large chunk materials using my screen, so that I've got all the nice fine stuff that fell through the screen down in the red bucket here, and everything that gets caught, including probably a whole bunch of worms, in this yellow tub over here. And then I wanted to arrange all that material after it's been separated that way, and the worms, and relocate it all over into a bus bin that I've got over up on the shelf. And that bus bin is actually in the proper location for this particular population of worms. The oldest active system that I've got, which is still kind of in the tail end of winding down its migration of straggler worms, is the African night crawlers on the upper left. Second oldest system is the bag, which will no longer be in the bag. It's going to be in the second position over on the shelf in that bus box. And the reason I wanted to do all this was so that I can initiate the migration of the worms out of their material. And I thought that it would just be much easier in a box rather than in this bag. And I also figured it would be really valuable and time well spent to separate the nice finished stuff from the somewhat not yet broken down stuff, and then arrange it all in that tub for a nice, neat migration of the worms out of the material. So, as I do from time to time, I've got my fancy little board of information here about these worms. The bag has been in service for 355 days, the large portion of that time spent outdoors, and it was just more recently, 87 days ago, that the system came indoors when it seemed like the weather was going to turn rather cold, and I really wanted them to stay warm and active. And it did seem to me like if we're going to try to get geared up for this system's version 5.0 at some point this year, we would have to bring this system to an end eventually. And to bring it to an end, it always seemed sensible to me to try to do it as a migration out of the material, the way I usually do when it comes to getting the worms out of their material. It seems like they've come up in good numbers to hang out beneath this plastic over here. The plastic would have been sort of bouncing back any of the material, any of the moisture trying to escape through evaporation out of the material. So it's always kind of fun when you got a bunch of worms hanging out on the top of the system there to greet you. I just thought it'd be kind of good to get them off this plastic, because this plastic was tailor-made to fit nicely on this bag, but when it comes time to cover up the bus box that we're going to be moving them into, I'm not sure this plastic bag would be the right fit. So I'm just going to see about evicting these worms off this plastic. I think we've almost got all of them already anyway, so it shouldn't take too much longer. Some of them are really tiny though. A lot of them are little itsy bitsy baby worms. And if you ask me, it's always a good sign when you see little itsy bitsy worms hanging out. That's just a good sign, because it means they're breeding and they're trying to expand the size of their population. So now, I think we've gotten the majority of them. It certainly looks that way. Here's one more. Oh, and there's another one. So I think we've gotten them all. I'm just going to take another quick look over the plastic here. Oh, I found one more. I almost forgot him. But I'm going to fold the plastic over just so it doesn't suddenly flash dry out and become inhospitable, just in case there's any more little wormies hanging out on that thing. We'll be able to fish them off a little bit later. Alright, so wondering if this is some sort of a material that's not even compostable. Seems like some sort of a fabric or some sort of a weird woven material. Doesn't strike me as a compostable type of material, so I figured I would just extract it there. And I didn't really imagine myself doing anything very fancy here with this, other than just doing one handful at a time right into the screen, separating anything large and letting anything small fall through, and no particular emphasis on trying to keep worms either in the fine material that drops through the screen or with the bulk material that gets caught in the screen. and set aside, because like I said before, I'm striving to set this entire batch of material up for migration to get the worms moving out of it. And a lot of times, you know, when you see this much scrap material floating around in one of your bins, it almost seems like the more sensible thing to do would be to just give the system some time to forage so that the worms can really work on picking off all the leftover stuff that still floats around within here. But you know, I did bring down a good fair bit of food for them in anticipation of wanting to set up this migration. Stuff like this too, a big stick. I just figured it's not really going to break down. It's not going to turn into compost anytime soon, so I just extract it now. And here too, an unusual piece of material that doesn't belong in a worm bin, a chunk of plastic. Just weird that I wouldn't have fished these objects out at some point earlier over the almost 1 year lifespan of the system. Just funny how certain things manage to evade you sometimes. Yeah, it feels pretty dry down here at the bottom of the bag. You know, we protected the outer edges of the bag from losing too much moisture by kind of lining the fabric bag, because there's two fabric bags here actually, one inside the other. So we lined the space in between the two bags with plastic. So right against the side of the container, it's nice and damp, but right at the bottom where there was just the bag itself with nothing, no liner, no plastic to protect drying and evaporation, it does feel pretty dry down there. So, you know, I think I'm just going to go for it. I feel like if I mess around too much, I have the potential of talking myself out of doing this, and in the end we'll just end up feeding and leaving the system to forage or something. But I do feel like putting them into something that's got a slightly better capability of maintaining its moisture rather than allowing any further ongoing drying would be to the benefit of the overall system. Because if we do end up, that's the thing, do we forage, do we migrate? I just have this feeling like I'd like to just maybe get them migrating soon. But maybe a little period of foraging would be a better way to start the whole thing. But you know what, why don't we use start as the operative word here. We better just get started on this instead of giving me more time to possibly talk myself out of getting this going. So I'm actually going to work this stuff through, and I'm probably going to accumulate a lot of large chunk materials rather quickly because there is just so much of it in here. But we did actually, over the past few check-ins, make a pretty concerted effort to try to collect as much of that sort of stuff up along the way and sort of centralize it and place it down into the middle of the bin to go right in alongside where the feedings are being applied each time. Thinking that that would help that material, you know, get to the finish line a lot more rapidly. But I do feel like we've got just a huge quantity of unbroken down material all over this system. When the system was originally set up, it was outside, and I don't think we were so particular about the sort of things we were putting in here as food for them. What have we here? This is the larva of a black soldier fly. I actually spotted one of these the other day, and I took it outside and I put it into the outdoor compost barrel. And I'll do the same with this guy here too. Sometimes it is kind of amazing that I'm able to spot those little guys. And I guess we could even look through some of this bulk material over here after we sift out all the nice castings. See if there's any more of those guys hanging out here, because as the weather warms up, there will be a greater and greater tendency for those to actually sort of activate and try to pupate and turn into an actual fly rather than just hunkering down because of the coolness and waiting until warmer weather. So if I'm able to get them out of my basement, that's better than allowing them to get to the point where they do actually transform into a fly. So I've already done maybe 5 or 6 handfuls here, and the amount of stuff accumulating here is substantial. It almost makes me feel like I'd like to drop it out, place it into the collection box sooner rather than later, just because it's going to start obstructing the screen and prevent the stuff that I'm putting in afterwards to flow through quickly and easily. So, all right, usually I prop the usually I prop the red bucket up with a brick so it stays in position, but right now I don't have that there. A lot of the stuff coming through with this large chunk material is just worms, and that's kind of to be expected because I'm making no particular effort to keep the worms separate from anything. I'm just taking this stuff pretty much as is. And there is going to be a portion of this in the very, very middle, at the very end. I think we'll just wait till we get to that point at the very end, where there's probably going to be a whole lot more worms, because that's where we were applying the feedings, right down the middle. And that's probably also where there's the greatest amount of moisture, as the outer edges tend to dry a little bit here and there. I would imagine that the worms seek out the more moist and damp material in the system, which is probably right down the middle. And that's probably where we'll find the greatest number of worms, but I thought we would kind of work our way around that and do that section at the very end. And I'm just wondering if this might be a good time to sort of shut my mouth and just do a bunch of this without providing any narration, in the interest of allowing it to get done a little bit more quickly so that I can even speed up the video. And then we can regroup as we start to get to the next stage, which will be closer to the middle where a larger quantity of worms are going to be. So why don't we do just that? So now, I still have plenty of room to go in here, it seems, but in the collection bucket here, the red bucket that I'm screening into, it's getting quite heavy, and it seems to me like we could probably lighten the load here considerably if we were to do an emptying of this. So I'm going to go ahead and dump this out over into the bus box that I'm going to be moving it all over into. That'll make this a little bit more lightweight, easier to handle. We'll be able to pick up when I get back. Okay, we can start anew here with plenty more space, but I think the game's going to change a bit more because the material we're about to delve into down the middle is going to be different from a couple points of view, not only from the fact that it's where the feedings have been getting placed, so that's where all the leftovers and large bulk materials are going to be much more abundant. That's where all the worms are going to be too, I believe. Well, not all of them, a good number of them. I got a feeling a certain number of them have already gotten caught in the screen and have been dumped over into this collection of bulk materials. But I think we're just going to continue with the same process because, like I said earlier, I don't think we're too interested in trying to separate worms from material or anything like that. Here, I believe the primary consideration is to take the more finished stuff and keep it separate from the stuff that still has a ways to go before it's totally broken down, and then kind of reconstitute all that material once it's separated into the plastic box so that we can possibly manage the contents a little bit more easily. So let's pick up the pace here again. I'm going to run through this possibly with fast motion again, unless things start to get interesting, and then maybe I'll just let the camera roll and we could gawk at it and talk about it. Yeah, look at that. That handful of worms brought with it a far greater number of, the last handful of material brought with it a far greater quantity of worms. But if I'm quick about it and I do the shaking to get the loose finished castings off of them for the most part, I can do another dump of them over into this pile of stuff. I guess this pile of stuff is definitely going to end up being very richly populated with worms. And we'll end up with a little bit of composted material, but probably mainly stuff that still has a ways to go. Yeah, look at that. Oh man, we've got ourselves a whole lot of worms down here. Kind of makes me want to limit the amount of shaking I put them through. I still think I'm going to put them in the screen and shake them to a certain point to get some of the finished casting separated from them. But I'll try to do it rather quickly so that we can just sort of not subject them to too much stress if possible. Yeah, we got a good number of worms coming together in this feeding area here. Should be pretty interesting once we start scooping handfuls of this stuff out of the middle where all the worms are. But here too, you can see quite a good number of worms came through with that last handful as well. And I think it's just going to keep getting more and more. Well, let's not try to dance around the wormies. Let's just go ahead and get them in and out of the tumble zone here. It's mostly nice castings surrounding them. I'll just give them a quick little spin here. Give them a little ride in the spin cycle. I'm sure a number of them probably dropped through, but the majority of them probably remained on the screen. One of them was on my glove, and I did notice one of them was down here as well, so let's make sure they're not disjointed from the rest of the family. And I think we could probably pull off the rest of this in a couple more handfuls. And then at some point at the end I should be able to just pour out what remains in this grow bag. And then we'll be able to start setting up the bus box. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to subject them to too much of this shaking. Still want to try to separate them from the finished stuff if I can, as long as I've got them kind of going from point A to point B, and I've got this whole gizmo set up, so we'll do a little bit of it, but not a whole lot of it. Try to spare them the shaking and jostling. But I think one quick ride on the screen, a little bit of shaking, can't be too jarring to them. I'm sure they don't appreciate it all that much, but I don't think that they're gonna get too annoyed at me, hopefully. Here we have another black soldier fly larva, which I'm gonna place over here alongside the other one so we can take both of them outside. If I spot any more, I'll do the same. See, down here at the bottom of the bag, things are a little bit drier because the bottom wasn't protected from moisture loss. Only the sides of the bag were, and even the sides of the bag were not perfectly protected from it. Sometimes I'm not sure what the worms are doing. I think that they've actually kind of lodged themselves into the fabric under like maybe loops in the fabric. I wonder if maybe I could just sort of pick the whole thing up and kind of move it around in my hands and a little bend it and shake it around a little bit, and maybe these worms will come loose so we don't have to go crazy trying to worry about them. Maybe if I have a lot of trouble separating them from the bag, then maybe I can just take it outside and they could just be set free or something. I don't know. Let's get this little guy over here too before he entangles himself in the fabric of the bag. Yeah, you know, this material does seem to have little loops that the worms can kind of get into. And that might be something that they see as a good way to grab on to protect themselves. But then they're going to sort of be stuck to the bag, which isn't the ideal situation. Alright, I gotta admit, this is coming along a little bit more quickly than I thought. I didn't think it would be done quite so fast, but we are, for the most part, done here. I think I might need a few minutes just to pay attention to some details, such as making sure I've not got any worms caught in my screen device, make sure I didn't toss any worms on the table, and if I did, I'll pick them up and get them reunited with the rest of the crowd. I'll spend a little time seeing what I could do about getting this last bit of material dislodged from the bag, and hopefully that includes the worms that are appearing to attach themselves to the bag. But if I find that it becomes difficult to get them out of here, maybe I'll simply take the bag outside and let the worms sort of crawl out of the bag on their own accord or something. See, like this little guy here, he's got himself sort of underneath a little loop of fabric. Oh, see, I feel bad now. I just tore this poor worm in half, and I believe half of the worm will survive or something like that, or I forget what the deal is. I try to, not make a practice of tearing worms in half, so that was certainly not intentional, but I don't think it's the end of the worm should that happen. I think the worm does continue on. Perhaps not both ends of the worm make it, though. I think at that point maybe one half of the worm will wither away, but the other part of it should live on, hopefully. So let's see what we could do about trying to empty this here. It's extremely difficult because of the low ceiling here, but I'm going to see what I could do about emptying what remains in this bag, and then possibly pausing the camera for a while to try to deal with the worms that are left behind in the bag, and then we'll press on to getting the new home that I've got for them set up nicely and give them the food that I bought down here for them today. So I think this is a good time to make a pause, and I'll pick up where we left off momentarily. So until then, hang on tight. We'll be right back. Alright, we're almost ready to reset, and part of that's going to be utilizing what you see here in this assortment of kitchen scraps. There's potato peels, there's green beans. Are they green beans? No, maybe they're asparagus. There's carrot, there's tomato, there's all kinds of goodies in here, and there's a good bit of it as well. And what you see down below is the tub that we're going to be now running these worms in, along with their nice finished castings over here that I dumped in previously. But before we bring in all this other large chunk stuff that the screen caught, where the majority of the worms are, I wanted to just go through this material really quickly just to check it out. It did seem to me, when I was sort of rummaging through it a little bit earlier, that there were some worms to be found in it. Mostly little ones, which is not too surprising. Little worms are the ones that would have slipped through the screen easily and gone down into the bucket with the finished castings, probably saving most of the larger size worms to remain with the, the large chunk materials that the screen captured. And the stuff feels really nice and moist, nice and smooth, all flowing, nothing clumpy about it, which is really cool. So I think in order to make room for the large chunk materials that also needs to come back in here with all the worms, we're going to have to move all of this stuff over. And even though this is one of my larger size tubs, it does feel to me like we're going to pretty much make use of every cubic inch of it in this process, or at least to give myself enough room, I feel like we're going to have to pile things up pretty good so that I could set up this other end of the bin with all those materials that still need a lot of work to get broken down. That's also where we're going to place in today's feeding. And I've also got like a little tradition when I'm starting to try to separate the nice castings from the place where there's going to be things that could litter the nice finished castings. I like to use some sort of like a little barrier or divider. Certainly not one that's meant to keep the worms from passing through, as you can tell, because it's full of tiny little holes. But I think it does often help a lot in keeping the feeding side separate from the finished castings. And then this way when the time comes to harvest the castings, you don't find yourself trying to pick out all kinds of residual stuff. Although, this wasn't like a perfect screening process either. There's all kinds of little bits of material that did fall through the screen. Because it's a pretty good size hardware cloth. I would say it's probably about a 1/4 inch or whatever. So stuff falls through and it's not a big deal as far as I'm concerned. I guess if I was looking to sell this stuff in the store, I would probably want to go the extra mile and try to make sure that the material was free of everything and that it was pretty much pure castings. But for my own personal use and for, giving it to family and friends, this stuff is actually quite nice. And a lot of people will even tell you, hey, there's a pretty good benefit to even having residual organic matter in your finished castings. This way the microbes and the bacteria that inhabit the material still have something to continue nibbling on. Additional stuff that continues to just gradually, slowly break down, keeping the microbiology of the material healthy and well fed. And it does seem to me like when I go into a batch of material that I actually had put away quite a while ago, just put it away into storage, whenever I go back into that stuff, it does seem like there's virtually nothing of that sort remaining in it. So I know that there's still activity breaking down residual little debris in my finished castings that usually ends up being a little bit imperfect, but everything seems to come out in the wash. So I think I've made myself sufficient room to fit all this stuff in here. At least I hope so, because there is quite a bit of it. But I think we'll only know once we actually get to putting it in here and we try piling it in. So this thing's a little bit larger than the width of the container, so that's the reason I had to put a few folds into it. But I believe if we sort of position it somewhere around here, that should give us space to put all the unbroken down materials down into here, and then start, bringing in the fresh food that we've got for them. I even had this idea of possibly putting a little liner in here. I've got a piece of newspaper here that would fit nicely in here as sort of a bottom liner, something that could even kind of work in tandem with this little cardboard divider to keep the finished castings clean and free of debris. So this way I think we can start piling this stuff in without worrying too much about contaminating all the nice finished castings. So let's start pouring this stuff in here gradually. I got a feeling we're going to see a good number of worms mixed in with this stuff, and I suppose if I'm methodical about it, I can also sort of check out what some of this stuff consists of. I already see stuff like avocado peels and avocado pits. That's what I believe this is right here. And I saw a corn cob, which had like an interesting appearance to it. It looked much thinner than a normal corn cob would look. Oh wow, the thing just broke apart in my hands, and you could see it's got a whole bunch of inhabitants in it, inside of it. Here's another one. There's this is something that I think I'm going to continue with, which is the theme I started earlier, is just picking out the black soldier fly larvae as I spot them. And I guess picking them out is probably another good reason for me to just not go wholesale and dump it all out at once. This way we can actually, try to see if we could spot any more of those little guys and pick them out and return them to the outside realm instead of letting them remain in here to become a fly. I mean, in here they'll not meet any other flies and they won't be able to complete their reproductive cycle by finding a mate, so it seems like the nicer thing to do to take them outside. This is a seed of an avocado that the worms are just totally emptying out. It's incredible how they just burrowed into it, and it's full of worms. And there's a whole bunch of this stuff. I mean, this crabgrass I put into the worm bag so long ago. Just incredible how slowly this stuff breaks down. I really thought it would go a lot quicker, but I guess you learn as you experience new things in your composting systems. Here's another black soldier fly larva. So we did actually manage to spot a few of them here along the way, and I'm just wondering how many of them I've missed. Another cool thing that I spotted in here earlier was a roly-poly, one of those isopods. And those are great insects to help work down the more tough materials that the worms are not able to work down themselves. So in the world of worm bin helper critters, I think the roly-polies are one of the real great ones to have around. And it did seem to me like for the most part a lot of them had vanished in most of my systems, so it was kind of nice to see them in here. Another black soldier fly larva. So I'm sure I'm not going to catch all of them. I wonder how many people are going to actually spot one in the video that I missed. I'll get like time indexes from the viewers telling me when I breezed past one that I could have picked out but didn't. I mean, the black soldier flies are so docile. It's not like if I found one flying around here in my wormery that it would cause me any sort of concern. I mean, it's happened in the past. It's happened that I, bought in black soldier fly larvae. They actually turned into a fly here in my wormery. And then made their way over to the bright lights, so I found them hanging out over at the window. And then they're so mellow you could just walk over to one and pick it up and it won't respond hardly. It won't mind at all. I mean, these things don't have stingers. They don't even have mouth parts because they're not even meant to eat during their lifetime. They have the ability to consume moisture once they turn into a fly, despite the fact that when they're still a larva, how ravenous they are and how much they consume. Once they turn to a fly, they no longer eat. Their only job as a fly is to survive long enough to find a mate and to lay their eggs, and then that's the end. And then on to the next generation. They're able to consume water, so that's one thing that they're able to do, but they are unable to eat once they turn into a fly. So imagine being born into a body where you can't eat despite being possibly hungry. Although I would think a creature that developed over millennia without a mouth probably doesn't experience hunger, so perhaps that's a non-issue. Now we're starting to bump into pretty good sized quantities of worms here, and that's kind of cool, but I'm still sort of maintaining focus on trying to spot the larva so that I can pick them out if I spot any more. But all these worms is pretty distracting, I must admit. There's a lot of them in here. There have been times when I was really questioning how many worms inhabit this bag, and I was at times thinking that it might not even be such an impressive number, but I think just from going through this process here of getting them out of the bag and sort of helping them get all rounded up into the middle of the bag before doing this haul out, it really revealed how many worms there actually live in here, and there's a good number of them, I think. My only hope is that they don't feel the need to venture back out into the finished castings. My hope is that they consider this material here interesting enough, with sufficient amounts of bedding and food and company, that they stay and that they don't wander back out into the finished castings. I mean, a lot of times I'll try to promote the drying of the castings so that it in itself, the drying of the material, serves as a repellent to get the worms to want to leave the material. But I don't know, I was kind of thinking that maybe it would be nice to see that material sit around perhaps a little while, just in case there's any cocoons lingering in it that need time to hatch and the worms to move out of it. But I don't know, we'll have to decide. I don't know if I saw enough cocoons along the way that I really feel the need to do that, but I'll have to decide later. Perhaps all we'll do is start treating this as a simple migration of whatever straggler worms remained in the finished castings over to join the rest of the crowd, and then we'll just do a haul out and harvest the castings and call it a day, and perhaps not worry so much about cocoons on this round. Because it's weird, certain systems I See lots of cocoons in. Other systems I feel like I see hardly any. Okay. I did sort of dump that last little bit in here without very thoroughly examining it. I know I spotted a black soldier fly larvae there that I was able to pull out, but I thought that I'd kind of look through here a little bit more just to see if I could spot any more and possibly remove them too. Seeing all this food in here makes me question whether it's even necessary to put any food in here. I mean, there is just so much stuff in here for these worms to work on. But you know what? I'm not going to be stingy. I'm going to give them what I, bought down for them. Because it's right here and it's been thawing out nicely, and I think we can just kind of pile it right into here. I believe I will place it into the far end of the material here so that we can sort of have this concept of we don't want the worms there, we want them over this way and as far this way as possible. So maybe we'll just position all this food that I brought down for them on the very, very far edge. And I even thought about maybe putting in a little supplementary bedding to go in with this feeding, but I don't think it's necessary with all that stuff we just filtered out, screened out. I mean, large amounts of it is food items, but a good bit of it is also remaining bedding. Although, I'm not a big fan of leaving just a big pile of food out this close to the surface without burying it. I wonder if it might be beneficial just to come in here with a little bit of my prepared bedding. I've got a little bit remaining of it right here behind me. I think we could at least use that for, if nothing else, just to cover up the food. Kind of protect it from any curious little insects that might want to come down here and try to take advantage of that. Perhaps this way, if it's covered up like so, it'll, keep any sort of inquisitive insects away. All right. Very, very nice. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time. I was really curious to see how it would go. I've tried similar things in the past, trying to screen the material to separate the stuff this way, and this does feel to me like this was possibly one of the more successful attempts at it. So now this is kind of where I think it's going to end up in terms of standing it up vertically. So I think we can go ahead and just backfill the opposite side, and now it should sort of just stand up on its own anymore. And I wouldn't want to see this material dry off any further, so for that reason I've got a pretty thorough piece of newspaper covering I was going to drape over the entire system. I was even thinking I would spray it down, so I got my water bottle out here. And then I've got some bubble wrap with which we can cover up as well to help lock in the moisture content of this system so that it doesn't tend to dry out, because I don't think that there's any need for drying. I think that the moisture level in here is quite nice, and I wouldn't want to make it uncomfortable for the worms. So I think even on the finished casting side, I thought I would even give that stuff a little shot of moisture. Why not? And then even into here, because some of this bedding is a bit dry, but I don't think it's going to need much more than that. That really seems like it should work out well. The nice replacement covering I came up with is here. I think it's almost perfect in terms of covering the entire system. Perhaps it could have been a little bit longer, or maybe I can even use it like this so that it does actually cover the entire system. That's pretty cool. And on with the plastic, and we'll be done. Alright everyone, that was kind of fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it wasn't too boring. I think it was kind of fun. And we'll have to check in on these worms at some point soon. The only thing I've got left to do is getting these black soldier flies returned to the compost barrel outside, and I'll take care of that in a moment. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.